So far, I would say Genshin Impact has done a good job of making character gameplay feel unique and interesting. For example, Venti, Sucrose, and Kazuha all have the same general game plan, yet they accomplish it in different ways whilst fulfilling different niches. This is why I feel that Yoimiya's release is concerning. She has a lot of distinct individual problems, many of which I will be discussing in this video, but what I really want to focus on overall is her design flaws in a broader perspective. I would consider Yoimiya's release to be the worst one to date because it really feels like she has no place in this game. Every previous limited 5-star character successfully fills some kind of gameplay niche that makes them stand out, yet I don't feel that way for Yoimiya. Her basic concept is fine and is perfectly doable, yet in execution it just fails in many ways. Welcome back to my Why Character series, where I try to investigate the gameplay design of unpopular or underrated Genshin characters to try and get a better overall understanding of their shortcomings. So first, I should define exactly what Yoimiya's concept is. Identifying what a character is designed to do is fairly simple, because the effects and limitations of their abilities tend to lend themselves to a certain playstyle. Some characters buff teammates, are limited by cooldowns, and set up reactions, typically making them a sub-DPS or support. Other characters have a period where they can deal consistently high damage, but only when they are the active character, making them a main DPS. Where Yoimiya falls is in a unique spot, where her abilities promote first using her as a main DPS, then switching her role to a sub-DPS / support. She technically does do this, but there are so many systems and design choices in place which make it so that Yoimiya can barely accomplish either of these two objectives. This is why I find Yoimiya to be a problem. Not because she doesn't do over-the-top damage like Ganyu, but because unlike every previous limited 5-star, she does not succeed in fulfilling her own niche within the game's combat system. So the first part of Yoimiya's job is to provide a window of initial DPS. This is done through her normal attack combo, which is enhanced by her elemental skill. The most apparent issue here is that as a bow user, her attacks can only hit a single target at a time. Especially in a game where every other main DPS has area of effect potential, this is pretty unacceptable. Sure, it makes her unique, but it's more like a downgrade because it barely has any redeeming qualities. As a bow user, you would expect her to be able to use her range as an advantage, yet it doesn't even do that much for her. Unlike heavier weapons, Yoimiya's attacks don't really stagger enemies, making her feel more vulnerable at times. Also, a lot of enemies can shoot projectiles at you or dash up on you, making the range feel irrelevant. Because the arrows have travel time and are kind of slow, that means they might just whiff completely. Not to mention, Genshin's auto-targeting system means you can't always hit the enemy you want to. Even if your Yoimiya does good damage, when you choose to use her, it's like you are intentionally restricting yourself. No other main DPS struggles to put out damage in the same way Yoimiya does. It's pretty evident that Yoimiya's unique charge shot is an afterthought within her kit. Surely it's not a coincidence that none of her 6 constellations are related to it. C2 is the only one which indirectly affects it, but even then it is clearly meant for her basic attacks. I suppose that having it is better than it not being there at all, but it really serves no purpose besides maybe hunting. I feel like the intention was to give her a way to reliably output pyro damage while her elemental skill is on cooldown, but just switching out to any other character accomplishes way more than this slow charging, weak attack. Overall, I'm disappointed that they chose to go with this over something which would have actually synergized with her kit, especially since it could have been something to help her other problems. Another unique part of Yoimiya's damage is how it is designed to be sustained damage rather than burst damage. This is evidenced by her first Ascension passive, which ramps up in damage after continuously attacking. Again, it's different, but really doesn't have any upsides. So Yoimiya's damage is spread out across these fast but lighter hitting basic attacks. It might not seem to mean much at first, but she doesn't benefit from the multiplicative amplifying reactions, melt or vaporize, nearly as much because of this and the internal cooldown mechanic. Commonly referred to as ICD for short, it's the rule that makes it so that you cannot apply an element on every attack. If you want to know the full details, there are great videos out there, but all you need to know right now is that Yoimiya can only proc a reaction every 3 hits. Using arbitrary numbers to help conceptualize this, a Hu Tao charged attack vaporize is like taking 3 times 2. while Yoimiya Vaporize is like taking 3 ones and multiplying only the first by 2. Even if you were to start with the same total base damage, the multiplication is applied less when it's spread out. When it comes to the transformative reaction of Overloaded, which scales off Elemental Mastery and not attack, Yoimiya still ends up falling behind. Other characters have abilities with unique ICD properties that can apply Pyro faster than Yoimiya despite her attack speed. Now let's move on to Yoimiya's second goal, providing off-field support for her teammates. This is primarily accomplished through her Elemental Burst, which leaves a mark that can only be exploded by another party member's damage. Yes, you can activate it from other characters' off-field damage, but to me it seems more like a workaround rather than the intended design. Anyways, just to put into perspective how weak this ability is, here's Yoimiya's Elemental Burst compared to Albedo's Elemental Skill. They both can proc every 2 seconds, yet Yoimiya's has worse scaling, a shorter duration, a longer cooldown, and since it is a burst it needs to be charged up. You might be thinking that since Yoimiya is Pyro, her reaction potential with this ability is superior. While technically true, this ability's ICD holds it back. The other condition for ICD is its 2.5 second cooldown on element application. This means that the ability activates its damage before the ICD is over, and rather than getting a reaction every 2 seconds, you actually end up getting one every 4 seconds. It's pretty bad. Yoimiya's 4th Ascension passive adds another element to the mix, given that it grants other party members an attack buff after her Elemental Burst. It starts off at 10%, but can be increased to 20% if you stack up normal attacks on Yoimiya's 1st Ascension passive beforehand. This is not difficult to do at all, but even then 20% is not a whole lot. Bennett's Burst at level 1 grants more than twice as much of a bonus. Even besides Bennett, any other sub DPS / support accomplishes more. More in terms of raw damage, more in terms of reaction potential, and definitely more in terms of utility. As a last note to the burst, I just gotta say that its restriction is absolutely unnecessary. For the 4th Ascension buff, sure, make it teammates only. In fact, Hu Tao has a similar effect on her 1st Ascension passive and it works perfectly fine. For the burst's mark though, it doesn't make any sense that Yoimiya can't activate it on her own. The game already incentivizes you to utilize team synergy since no character can make a reaction happen all on their own. And even though some reactions are more useful than others, it is always better to have any rather than none at all. So that's why this restriction is so dumb. It doesn't encourage anything which isn't already encouraged and only works as a limitation. Yeah, most of the time you will be using other characters and activating it anyway, but just why? Again, I don't think Yoimiya should do insane damage for no reason. I just think that she should be able to do something which other characters cannot. Her effective on-field damage is pitiful due to her single targeting, and using a bow doesn't have enough upsides to it. Especially given that Pyro has the most characters in the game, she does not do anything that other Pyro characters can't do better. The one advantage that makes her unique, her Elemental Burst's off-field potential, is horribly flawed. It again does no damage, but also does not set up reactions well and barely provides utility. A character who can flip-flop between being a main DPS and sub DPS sounds like an amazing concept that I'm sure can be done right, but Yoimiya just has too many gameplay design issues. Are there other characters in the game that feel like they don't fulfill their own niche? Maybe, but this is the first time that it's on a limited 5-star character, which I don't think is okay. Personally, I don't find it likely that Yoimiya will get a true buff, maybe some changes listed as bug fixes if we're lucky. I still think Yoimiya can be fun to use, but it's very hard to ignore the problems that she faces. I just hope that at the very least, this is something that doesn't happen again. In this series, I always like to give a bit of character appreciation to contrast me criticizing them. After all, characters are much more than just their gameplay. So before we go, here are some of Yoimiya's visual design details. Yoimiya is very clearly based around Japanese Natsumatsuri, or summer festivals. Although different festivals have different things, extravagant fireworks shows are very common. As the owner of Naganohara Fireworks, you can see them in the background of her burst, and there's a sparkler in her idle animation. Her robe is reminiscent of a yukata, which are typically worn to festivals because of both tradition and the fact that they are lightweight enough to be worn comfortably in the summer. She has lots of white wrapping around her body called sarashi. It is worn under other clothes, either for its light breathable material or because it symbolizes toughness. On Yoimiya's waist is a kinchaku, a small drawstring bag used during festivals to hold belongings like your phone or wallet. The thick rope on her back is a shimenawa, which isn't as related to festivals and is associated with ritual purification. It can be seen around the waist of quite a few anime characters as well. Lastly, her constellation, Carassus auratus, is the scientific name for goldfish. This is most likely a reference to Kingyo Sukui, or goldfish scooping. This is a common summer festival game in which you use a fragile plastic scoop called a poi to catch as many goldfish as you can before it breaks. I know I also usually mention lore, but I'm actually saving that for another video. Well, I hope you guys found this slightly different take on Yoimiya's gameplay to be interesting, and as always, thank you for watching.